This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, Vadim. Thank you so much for finding time to talk with me and discuss this very topical and very interesting subject. I've been a big fan of your project. As you know, I've been following you for over 10 years by far. And I can't imagine any conversation about Vysotsky in translation into English in particular without you. Therefore, once again, thank you so much for your participation and your openness. And the first question I wanted to ask you, is there any particular hotspots in Vysotsky lyrics that you struggled the most and appreciated the struggle and benefited in the end, one way or another, from this interaction and digestion of Vysotsky's thought, his wording, and so forth?
Well, first of all, hello, Natalia. Hello to all of viewers. Yes, my name is Vadim Astrakhan, and my project is called Vysotsky in English. Obviously, longer and more complex songs like Two Fates and The Grand Mistake, or When the Great Flood Waters Have Subsided, due to sheer volume, presented a certain challenge. Just because there was so much to go through. And as a translator, I want to make sure that I understand every possible context and subtext, because it's kind of hard to translate when you don't know what the author has been talking about. And for more complex philosophical pieces, obviously there's more than one semantic layer, more than one meaning. It presented a pretty big challenge. But strangely enough, the even more work was required by simpler and more straightforward songs, like If Your Friend, Песня о друге, and Wolf Hunt. Sometimes those were even harder for a rather paradoxical reason. For preserving that very simplicity. I don't just translate poetry. I translate and I perform, or I sing. So songs must be singable. This is not a problem that a typical translator usually encounters when you just translate a piece of literature and you publish it or you put it up online. I actually have to sing it. And if it is not singable, then if it's cumbersome, if the words don't roll out of my mouth and flow smoothly, much of the effect is lost. So in songs where the simplicity and singability was essential, those took a very long time. For example, If Your Friend, being probably one of the simpler songs in Vysotsky's extensive catalog, took me a good 6 years to translate because it was just too cumbersome, and I wanted to retain that basic appeal and basic simplicity, because ultimately, the song with its 3 verses talks about 3 different scenarios. A question mark, a minus sign, and a plus sign, right? In the first verse, you're asking a question: who is this standing before you? Can you trust this person? The second is he failed the test by mountain climbing, and so it's like a minus sign. And the third verse is somebody who passed the test, and now you can trust this person with your life. And the song is very basic, very straightforward, very much in your face. So I was really going out of my way to simplify it, make it as simple as possible. So it had to be understood basically on the first try without revisiting it. So this is why it took so long.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I find your translation of this particular Vysotsky's piece probably an etalon, of a perfect translation and singability at the same time.
Thank you. Sometimes, just to elaborate on this, another thing I always go out of my way to preserve is Vysotsky's vocal melodies, because to me they're crucial part of the charm of his songs. But the songs are mostly basic 5 chords, but it's his melody, the melodies that make his songs such masterpieces of songwriting. Because had they not had good melodies, people would read them as poems and not play them for their enjoyment time after time. So Vysotsky's melodies are very, very important. So I almost always did my best to preserve the melodies, but sometimes on very few occasions I had to change the melody just enough to preserve the music, if you will. Like, for example, the song "Save Our Souls," "Спасите наши души." Obviously, his very famous chorus goes "Спасите наши души," and in English it just wasn't working. Again, so I made a different emphasis and a pause in a different place. SOS, save our souls. So instead of 2 pauses, I only had 1, but that ultimately preserved the singability and the length, and of course the meaning.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And I was just about to tell you or remind you that it's exactly the melody of Vysotsky's songs that you like so much playing with, not changing probably the very tune, but the genre thereof. For instance, in this first song that you talked about, the song about the friend, you made it almost into a tango-esque piece versus what it was originally.
Yes, I tried. As the project moved along, I became interested in not just translating the lyrics, but also playing a little bit with the music. But I changed arrangements, but I almost always preserve the melody, because to me, the Vysotsky songs are really first and foremost are about their lyrics, but also about the melody. That's what makes him a great and a very underrated composer. I believe that people don't talk enough about his skills as a composer, as a creator of very memorable melodies. Because I mean, at this point, it's commonplace to realize that he was a genius poet. I mean, even though that was contested in the days bygone.
Yeah.
Yes, but right now, pretty much, it is accepted. It's at this point, we don't have to challenge that notion. But I think the next step is to realize that he was actually a brilliant melody maker, a brilliant songwriter, a brilliant composer. So while trying to preserve the melodies, I think it's also acceptable or can be fun and also challenging to play a little bit with the arrangements. So the second album, where the song "If Your Friend Is From," it was produced mostly by Yuri Naumov, a famous Russian blues guitarist, who went out of his way to change the arrangements. Sometimes it's I even thought at times it was a bit overproduced. But it's something that I don't think Vysotsky would be necessarily opposed to, because when he had a chance, or I should say almost every time he had a chance, he would jump into re-recording his songs with professional musicians who changed arrangements. Sometimes those arrangements were good, sometimes they weren't, just like anything else. Anything can be done well or can be done poorly. In my opinion, about a third of Vysotsky's songs recorded with other musicians are good to great, and about 2/3 are just kind of bland. I don't think they add much to the message or to the song itself. But at any rate, it was fun to do.
Absolutely, your free spirit meets his free spirit in this realm, and most of the songs are really interesting, But speaking about sustaining Vysotsky's message in the first place, rather than just the wording and so forth, how important do you think to communicate, to convey all of this allusions, all of these cultural connotations his poetry is so densely populated with?
Well, it's of course very very difficult, and I don't think I will reinvent the wheel here if I say that it's impossible to translate every single connotation and every single meaning on the surface or beneath the surface. Just like, and again, an example that I like to give. When people read translation of Dante's Inferno, they don't go into the specifics of Italian politics of the 13th century. They just enjoy the poetry. Yes, and it was basically a political proclamation that
Of
Dante
course.
wrote. And a lot of those things, being 800 years old, they're lost in time. But the poetry and the brilliance of the story are preserved. So a lot of Vysotsky's songs are deeply rooted in the Soviet society of the 1960s and 70s, and a lot of connotations will be lost. A lot of meanings will be lost, not even to a foreign listener, but also even to a contemporary Russian. It would be hard. It would be hard to understand what the songs talk about. But that said, what ultimately makes Vysotsky so relevant and timeless is that he has enough songs that talk about immortal and timeless concepts like courage, like friendship, like lust for freedom, and like resistance, defiance, and of course love. Um, that I believe are certainly relevant. And
Translatable.
even if people don't understand or may not understand the background of, say, the song that I actually never translated, "Козел отпущения," for
That
example,
was my next
the,
question.
the scapegoat.
Uh-huh.
It when they listen to Vysotsky's original, again, they may not know all the underground information, but they will get that this song talks about freedom, talks about one's desire to do what they want to do, and resist and
Responsibility.
fight and defy people or in power. And this is more relevant than ever in given the circumstances, but not even not even talking about the war, and but still those things never change. Добро остается добром в прошлом, будущем и настоящем. И темница тесна, и свобода нужна, и всегда на нее уповаем. These words still ring true, just like they did 50 years ago.
I see. And yet you decided not to go this way and try to translate the song. If there are any other Vysotsky pieces that you decided you're not going to mess with, and if yes, then why? For what reason?
Well, first of all, just to set the record straight, I do have several songs that talk about defiance. Wolf Hunt is, of course, the most famous one, and that is his signature piece, talking about one's lust for freedom, defiance of authority, and going your own way. But also, I have translated songs like "The Warplane," "Як истребитель," and the Ballad of the High Jumper, Баллада про гоневую высоту. All these songs talk about defiance. The wolf defies hunter, the airplane defies the pilot, and the athlete defies the coach. He has other songs on the subject like "Бег находца" or "Микрофон." Again, same thing. You have characters defying the power. What other songs I have never attempted? Well, a lot of it, a lot of them are from the same batch that you and I talked about. Something that's so deeply rooted in the Soviet culture that it would take a lot of explaining and lecturing. And I always thought that it's just more fun to sing and for people to enjoy the songs without long explanations. When I give my talks, I usually do try to explain what is
Yes, you
what is
do.
going on
I'm
because
good at that.
yeah, because it never hurts to know what
Context.
Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, when it was written, under what
There we go.
circumstances.
There we go.
You may not know, and you may not need to know any of it, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have a little bit of background. But ultimately, I don't want to go too much into detail. So the song, for example, that I happily sing in Russian, "Dialog у телевизора," for example, it's very deeply rooted in the Soviet society and Soviet culture of the 1970s, and it is practically impossible to translate.
Мои друзья хоть не в Болонии, right? You
Yeah,
need to write a volume.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, technically, I could translate it. I could probably even rhyme it, but then the idea behind my translations is to find a cultural analog that would be somewhat similar, and go from there. So I could like transport it into somewhere in a trailer park in the Midwest, but it would be a totally different song. So totally different song. And I have done the same. I have done this very same thing twice. I have taken two humorous Vysotsky songs, «Слесарь шестого разряда» and then «Несостоявшийся роман» у нее, and I have pretty much changed the settings. I transported them from the 60s Moscow into contemporary New York, but basically for purpose of preserving the humor, because translating humor is not easy. And a lot of it has to do with making things funny that are relatable to a modern
The
modern
audience.
audience.
Mhm.
So when so as opposed to the metal worker, which is Slesary, I made it into a computer programmer, which but the issues that he deals with, his women basically and drinking, and basically very easily understandable. And for «Несостоявшийся роман» I called it One Failed Romance, and it takes place in New York City. And so instead of Spartak, I have Yankees. Instead of Министерство финансов, I have IRS. And this song is a smash hit pretty much every time I sing it, because people recognize familiar realities of life. The plot
Yes.
is still there. The plot is still pretty much the same. Guy is, trying to get a girl who's clearly out of his league,
And being a little bit of a sociopath, just like Vysotsky's character.
yes, and in that case, I believe a complete change of scenery is justified. I would not. I'm hesitant to say never, but I don't think I would want to do this with more serious songs, because they are where they are for a reason, and so it's just, I guess I treat them with a little bit more reverence. So
You
I don't
do.
change
You
that
do.
much.
Yeah, thank you so much. So much information. So it's not just linguistic job, right? Translating, it's cultural, social, anthropological, very often transplantation of a plot, of a character, and you need to be very well equipped, right?
See,
Culturally.
my translating motto is translate to relate. When I translate something, I want people to understand what I'm talking about. I don't want them to immediately grab a book on Soviet culture and language. I want them to get it from the first experience. And for that, I need to make things relatable. So for when it's something, when talk about things like courage and friendship and love and freedom, those things can still very much be relatable in the English-speaking audience. I just have to find appropriate cultural context, appropriate cultural analogs. Sometimes they don't exist, and those are the hardest. Of course, that's when you kind of have to scramble. One person on the internet once said, when you can't compare apples to oranges, but when you're trying to describe an orange to a person who's never seen one, an apple is a good place to start.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can't agree more. And your motto, translate to relate, it's an awesome one. And you've been very consistent in doing this job. And I have a whole list of questions to ask, but I probably will limit myself to one to conclude our conversation. And this is what drives your soul? What drives your mind every time you see a piece which you want to translate? I've been following, not very periodically, but still following your posts on Facebook. And once in a while, you would post something like the translation of the day, something like that. And that ranged from Strugatsky pieces to some others. What makes you do so? What makes you rack your brain over certain things?
Well, the unusual thing is that I never plan my translations, and I never plan any of this. A line just pops into my head, and I start thinking, how would I say it in English?
Why?
And
Why do you need to do that?
I think that goes all the way back to my childhood, because when I came to the United States at the age of 14, and I had very limited English, I was learning English. And at the same time, I was also a big fan of Vysotsky. I was playing him, strumming him, and singing him on my guitar. And as I was studying English, when I was like, okay, so how do I say this? How do I go? How do I get to the cafeteria? I don't know. So when I say this in Russian, my thinking was in Russian. So my next step is, okay, so how do I say this in English? And so at the same time, as I was singing Vysotsky in Russian, I was like, okay, so now how would I say this in English? And it was not, I never planned a career in translating. It was just like, it was just another exercise. How would I say this in English? Okay, pass me the salt, please, right? So, передайте, пожалуйста, соль. Okay, so I translated in my mind as pass me the salt. Okay, and then next thing is, how would I say something more complex in English? And so now when I'm, when a thought in Russian crosses my mind, I'm automatically pretty much thinking, okay, now how would I say this in English? And sometimes it's fun. Everything I do is for fun, one reason or another, one way or another. I do it because I like it. I'll do it because it's interesting, and it is a challenge. Sometimes you translate, you post it on Facebook, and then 10 minutes later you don't like it, and you go back and change it. This is why it takes such a long time for me to translate. I'm not a I don't think I could be a very good synchronous interpreter, because I like to go back and polish and polish and
Review,
polish
edit.
and again and again. And there are in fact 3 songs from my Vysotsky in English project that I have recorded that I have changed quite substantially since they've been recorded. And in the near future, I'm actually planning on recording a little video with 3 updated English translations.
Ah, cool.
just because I can, and because I guess the big philosophical question is there such a thing as a perfect translation? And I don't think there is. I think different people can tell the same story in different ways. You ask 10 people to tell the same joke, you will see some variations. And now that I'm no longer the same person that I was 15 years ago when I translated some of these songs, some of these texts, I can go back and change them a little bit, how I would retell this story now. So I think it has to do with the personal change, personal development, if you will. Obviously, people who have already published their work, they have a book out, there's nothing they can do. But luckily, I don't. The only place where you can read my stuff.
To
I'm sorry?
this restriction. You're not stuck to these restrictions, right?
Exactly.
It's a
So
digital project.
yeah, it's an ongoing thing, and so I change things, and
That's
that's
wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. In the very beginning, when you just started answering this question, I was going to suggest, would it be fair to assume that it's the two half of your bilingual self kind of continually talking to each other that drives your translation instinct? But in the end, you articulated a totally different answer, approach to that translation as a cognitive process, right? Kind of comprehending your own self, or am I making it too complex, overthinking it?
I admit I'm not sure what you mean.
Okay. Okay, my paper is actually addressing and interrogating the concept of translation as a kind of type of activity, cognitive activity, and you've provided wonderful material to my conclusions. I hope they will be interesting to you as well.
Thank you.
At
If
this
you have any
moment,
questions, I'm still good. You can ask me something else.
very good, very good. But the time restrictions are keeping us in
Uh,
line, and we have to put here not probably the period, not the dot, but dot, 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 and the dialogue should be continued.
Okay, very well then. Thanks to all the viewers, and if you want to check out
Thank
my
you so
website,
much for your time. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being part of this unique and really wonderful event. Thank you, Vadim.